Morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We're going to continue now our reading and discussion of the book Romanism and the Reformation by H. Grattan Guinness, the great Protestant orator, teacher, preacher, and author of the 19th century, the late 19th century. This book gives us the beliefs held by Protestants. And if you listen carefully, you will discover, as have I, that those who call themselves Protestants today do not believe what Protestantism originally believed. They've been perverted in their understanding. And in no case more so than their understanding of the Roman Catholic Church and what role it plays in Bible prophecy and in history. Now, this author is describing Rome as the persecuting power of the saints, describing first Daniel's foreview of the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy, then the Apostle Paul's foreview of the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy, and now the Apostle John, the Revelator's foreview of Romanism. Now we'll continue just backing up a little bit for continuity purposes. The first full paragraph on page 156, if you're following along, this from archive.org, University of Toronto, Romanism and the Reformation. The first full paragraph on page 156, where he talks about the complexity of this beast power. It's both a church and a state. The state is subservient to and answers to the church. That describes the old world order. The beast with 10 horns. Now we're going to discuss a lamb-like beast that looks like a lamb but speaks like a dragon. And we're going to be sad to discover a hideous reality that the United States is, in fact, that second beast. He says, again, the first full paragraph, page 156, we have already directed your attention to the fact that the papacy is a complex power and requires complex symbols for its prefiguration. It is both a secular, and I'll substitute the word civil, and an ecclesiastical power. That is a church-state power, or a state-church power, consecutively. First, it is a secular power, or the civil government, and it is also the church. And the ecclesiastical power, the church power, has arrogated to itself the right to create the secular. That's right, the Roman Catholic Church is in the business of creating the civil governments of the world, or endow it with divine authority, endowing the civil government with divine authority, and has also wielded the energies of the civil power, the secular power, in pursuance of its own unholy ends. Okay, this describes all of the old world order. The Roman Catholic Church established the civil governments of Europe, and it controlled the civil governments of Europe. And when these civil governments were so united or wedded to the Roman Catholic Church to form that state church power, it used that power to persecute God's people. Okay? To draw out the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. That was the old world order. Now we're going to talk about the progress of the New World Order. Remember, the secular power of the papacy was destroyed by the Protestant Reformation and also by the French Revolution. those kingdoms and governments of Europe in the Old World Order that used to serve at the behest of the papacy and to persecute the saints at the behest of the papacy, they threw off the Pope's civil power. The papacy regarded himself as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. In other words, he was head of both church and state. Well, during the Protestant Reformation and the French Revolution, the civil powers broke away from the papacy. The papacy was no longer a king of kings, though he remained a lord of lords. He maintained his ecclesiastical power, but was stripped of his temporal power. Now, continuing with the development of the New World Order, it says Revelation chapter 13 represents both these organizations, that is the church beast and the state beast. Revelation chapter 13 represents both these organizations as beasts. The one is represented as a 10-horned and the other as a 2-horned beast. The former rises, as does each of the beasts of Daniel, from the sea. The latter rises from the earth. Okay, where did those 4 beasts arise of Daniel? Well, in Europe, the heavily populated portion of the world, the sea, out of a sea of people, out of these 10 kingdoms. But the latter rises up out of the earth, an unpopulated portion of the world. Now he says the one springs up in storm, the other in stillness. Striving and warring winds attend the birth of the one, the other grows up quietly from a low terrestrial origin, like an ivy plant or a noxious earth-born weed. The 10 horns of the one are strong iron kingdoms. The 2 horns of the other are gentle and lamb-like. The 2 beasts stand side by side. They act together in everything. The earth-born beast is the quote-unquote prophet of the sea-born beast, and he is a false prophet. He compels subjection to the secular or the civil power, the government, especially to its new head, that head which had been slain and healed. That's the old world order. It had been slain, and now it is healed by this second beast, rising up out of the wilderness. It's being restored to life. The New World Order is simply a rebirth of the Old World Order that rises up not in the sea of Europe, but in the wilderness. Do I dare say it? In the wilderness, the United States of America. He establishes an idolatrous worship of that head, or a submission to its divine, to it as divine in authority. What he's describing here is the union of church and state in the United States of America, where our Constitution provides that they be separate. He's describing a union of church and state in America in the wilderness, but not a union with just any church, a union with the beast church of the old world order, the Roman Catholic Church. He says, quote, he, the second beast, exercises all the power of the 10-horned beasts in his warfare against the saints and the servants of God. That means as a result of the union of the Roman Catholic Church with the government of the United States, again, they will wage war against the saints and the servants of God right here in this once Protestant country. He continues, he works false miracles and accomplishes lying wonders, and even brings down fire upon the earth in imitation of the prophets of the Lord. That is, he causes judgments to descend on those who resist. You and me. Those who will never bend the knee to the papacy, the dragon, or his false prophet. Continuing, he says, he uses the instrument of excommunication, a weapon of celestial authority, and wields it with terrible effect. He lays kingdoms under interdicts and nations under anathemas. He makes idolatry compulsory, delivering to the secular arm, to the civil power, to the governments, all who refuse to render it, that they may be put to death. He prohibits all dealings with these so-called heretics, all traffic and communion with them. He allows none to buy from them and none to sell to them. He institutes the system which is now called boycotting, a system of persecution which was freely wielded by the popish priesthood in the Middle Ages and is still employed, as we know, in certain papal lands. How could the mutual relations of the political and ecclesiastical powers in the apostate Roman Empire be better represented than by these wonderful symbols? Here are a monarchy and a priesthood in close, nefarious association. The priesthood anoints the monarchy, serves it, and uses it. Together they rule, and together they persecute. No symbol can represent everything. No parable can correspond in all respects with the reality it depicts. It is surely enough if the principal features and primary relations are exhibited in the symbol or reflected by the parable. This is just what is done in the apocalyptic prophecy. Look at the facts. The papacy has been a political power for more than 1,000 years. The popes of Rome have been secular monarchs. They have possessed territories, levied taxes, laid down laws, owned armies, and made wars. The papal monarchy has been for ages an integral part of the Roman Empire. The papacy has also been a sacerdotal power, and still is so. While its temporal government has fallen, its spiritual power remains. Further, the papacy is served by an extensive sacerdotal organization, embracing about 1,000 bishops and 500,000 of priests. This organization controls the convictions and actions of 200 million of persons belonging to more than 30 nations. If the best symbol to represent the Roman Empire with its rulers be a 10-horned beast, what better symbol to represent the papal hierarchy than a 2-horned beast, whose horns are like those of a lamb, while it has the voice of a dragon? And what better name for that Roman Catholic hierarchy could be found than the false prophet? Does it not pretend to utter the messages of heaven? And as Moses and Elijah called down the fire of God's judgment on the enemies of Israel, has not this hierarchy brought down again and again, in the estimation of millions, the judgments of God on those who have resisted its will, whether individuals or nations? Has not this been one of its most tremendous and irresistible weapons? Read the history of the Middle Ages and of the 16th century. What nation in Europe has not been laid from time to time under papal interdicts and compelled by these means to submit to the decisions of the Roman pontiff? And has not the priesthood, too, been the author and instigator of a wholesale system of idolatry and persecution? Has it not employed the power of the state in enforcing idolatry and cruelly persecuting to death millions of the faithful who would not bow down to the knee to the modern, who would not bow the knee to the modern Baal? In all this history, only too faithfully corresponds to prophecy. Deep calls to deep, and the utterances of inspiration are caught up and echoed by the experiences of generations. The voices of the prophets come back in thunder from the course of ages, and the proof that God has spoken reverberates throughout the world. Having briefly considered John's prophecy concerning the rise and reign of the papal power, we have now to glance at its prediction of its fall and overthrow. This you will find in Revelation chapter 17 through 19. We've not time to read these chapters now. You're doubtless familiar with them and will do well to study them carefully and thoroughly. They contain the second complex or duplicate prophecy concerning Romanism, the career and judgment of Babylon the Great. In this prophecy, John beholds the 10-horned beast representing the Roman Empire, bearing a mystical woman dressed in purple and scarlet, decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, a harlot and the mother of harlots and abominations, the guilty paramour of kings, the cruel persecutor of saints, intoxicated, but not with wine, drunken with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. What a vision. What a prophecy. You remember the angel's interpretation of this vision. Quote, "The woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth." Unquote. We showed that that city was Rome, indisputably Rome. That Babylon the Great means Rome, is admitted by Romanists themselves. Cardinal Bellarmine says that, quote, "Rome is signified in the Apocalypse by the name of Babylon," unquote. Cardinal Baronius admits that, quote, "All persons confess that Rome is denoted by the name of Babylon in the Apocalypse of John," unquote. The historian Bossuet observes that, quote, "The features are so marked that it's easy to decipher Rome under the figure of Babylon," unquote. But while admitting that Babylon the Great, seated on the 7 hills, means Rome, papal interpreters assert that it means heathen Rome and not Christian Rome, the Rome of the Caesars and not the Rome of the popes. Now I'll make comment. When one gets to studying the prophecies and comes to the inarguable conclusion that the papacy, papal Rome, is that which is spoken of in the Scriptures, one is often to ask himself, well, how does Rome deal with these prophecies when they so clearly denote the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy? They simply dismiss all those prophecies as being applied to old pagan Rome that was destroyed the restrainer that restrained the rise of Antichrist, that it is being spoken of in those prophecies. How deceived. And she would like to deceive the rest of us as well, so that we would see Rome not as Babylon the Great, but as the woman, the bride of Christ. That is the great delusion, the grand delusion that has deceived millions throughout history. Now he continues, he says, in reply to this, we answer first that the name upon the harlot's brow is mystery, and that heathen Rome was no mystery. The true character of heathen Rome was never concealed. On the other hand, Christian Rome is a mystery. It is not what it seems. In profession, it is divine. In character, it is satanic. Here's a case, I will add in comment, here is a case that Rome can only be judged by her fruit. She sounds divine, but her real fruit reveals her true character. Continuing, he says, we say in the second place that there is a marked and intentional contrast in the apocalypse between the two cities, Babylon and Jerusalem, which is overlooked by the papal interpretation. Babylon in the apocalypse is a city and a harlot. Jerusalem in the same book is a city and a bride. The former is the corrupt associate of earthly kings. The latter, the chaste bride of the heavenly king. But the latter is a church. The former, then, is no mere heathen metropolis. The contrast is between two churches, the faithful church and the apostate church. It's describing two churches. It has nothing to do with pagan Rome. It's clearly describing two churches. No one would ever describe the old pagan Roman Empire as a church. So it must be speaking of papal Rome. Now it says in the third place, we point to the fact that the judgment described in Revelation chapter 18 falls on Babylon when her sins had reached to heaven. That is, in the darkest part of her career. But when Alaric destroyed Rome, that is, pagan Rome, in AD 410, that city had improved. It had become Christian. It was purified at that time from its pagan idolatries. Nor had it then sunk into the darkness of the papacy. It was not in the 5th century that Rome reached the uttermost height of her iniquity. The capture of the city by the soldiers of Alaric, when it was neither pagan nor papal, could not have been the judgment here foretold. Now we'll pause for the break and we'll return and continue our reading and discussion of Romanism and the Reformation.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. If you'd like to contact me, please do so by email. That's tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us if you have comments about this book. I'd love to hear from my listeners. But H. Grattan Guinness is showing us how the Roman Catholic Church dismisses all those prophecies that pertain to the Roman Catholic Church in reality. They explain them away as having their application in the old pagan Roman Empire, which the papal Roman Empire replaced. That the old pagan Roman Empire suddenly became Christian. Okay? It became Roman Catholic. They equate Roman Catholicism with Christianity. And that the old pagan Roman Empire produced the Antichrist that is spoken of in Revelation chapter 17, and that it applied to old Rome, not papal Rome. And this alternative interpretation of the prophecies obviously benefits papal Rome. It sheds the onus of Antichrist away from the papacy and onto one of the old pagan Roman emperors like Caligula or Nero or Domitian or one of those. But it doesn't. It belongs to the papacy. And this author, H. Grattan Guinness, is proving it. Okay? This idea that Antichrist belonged to the old pagan Roman Empire is where we get the preterist view of Bible prophecy. That all those prophecies regarding Antichrist have long since been fulfilled in the Scriptures, and leaving now papal Rome, Christian Rome, quote unquote, to convert the whole world to Christ, to bring the whole world under Christ's government, and of course, obviously, under papal government. The papacy intends now, holding to this preterist view of Bible prophecy, that it has a divine sanction of God to prepare the world for Christ's advent, to convert the whole world to Roman Catholicism, or to at least put every man, woman, and child in the planet under papal supremacy, under papal domination and control, under papal authority, as the vicar or the replacement of Christ on earth. Now, many people reject the preterist view. Now what has become orthodox is another equally or even more grievous error called futurism. that Antichrist doesn't come until the last 7 years before Christ's return. Some people are rolling their eyes saying, Tom, we've been over this a million times. But it has to be repeated until everyone has heard it. Both preterism and futurism are gross errors. It exonerates the papacy from what this author and Daniel and Paul and John foretold, that it was the papacy, the Antichrist. That was the belief of the Waldenses, the first century church, the Huguenots, the Hussites, the Lollards, the Anabaptists, and the Protestants. This is the majority view of those who are truly saved by the blood of Jesus Christ and who are not deceived. It's the papacy that fulfills all the prophecies of Antichrist, the false church. Now, he goes on to the fourth count, proving that these prophecies do not apply to the old pagan Roman Empire, but that they pertain to the papacy. It says, in the fourth place, we point to the fact that the destruction of Babylon foretold in the Apocalypse is total and final. As a great quote-unquote millstone, she is plunged into the deep. There is no recovery. This cannot refer to the mere burning of Rome in AD 410, for that event was speedily followed by the complete restoration of the city. When the Babylon of Revelation chapter 18 falls, the smoke of its burning goes up forever. It is found no more at all. In the fifth place, we point to the fact that the foretold destruction of Babylon is accomplished by, quote, the horns or governments which were previously subject to her rule, unquote. We freely admit that the Goths destroyed ancient Rome, but the Goths were not previously subject to Rome. The Gothic nations did not first submit to Rome obediently, and then cast her off, and then rend and trample and destroy her. All this, however, these nations did in the case of papal Rome. For centuries they were subject to her, then they cast her off. Look at the French Revolution. See the deeds of France. Look at Italy in 1870. See the continent today. In the sixth place, we point to the fact that the foretold destruction of Babylon is immediately to be followed by the marriage of the Lamb. This is clearly foretold in Revelation chapter 19. But the capture of pagan Rome by Alaric was not followed by that event. Alaric captured Rome 15 centuries ago, while the marriage of the Lamb is still yet future. This utterly excludes the notion that the destruction of Rome by Alaric is the judgment intended, and that Babylon the Great represents pagan Rome. And as Babylon the Great does not represent Rome pagan, it must of necessity represent Rome papal. There's no other alternative. Now, in conclusion, read this wonderful prophecy concerning Babylon the Great in the clear and all-revealing light of history. I ask those of you who have read the history of the last 18 centuries, did not Rome Christian become a harlot? Did not papal Rome ally itself with the kings of the earth? Did it not glorify itself to be as queen and call herself the mistress of the world? Did it not ride upon the body of the beast or fourth empire and groan and govern its actions for centuries? Did not papal Rome array itself in purple and scarlet and deck itself with gold and precious stones and pearls? Is not this its attire yet still? We appeal to facts. Go to the churches and see for yourself. Look at the priests. Look at the cardinals. Look at the popes. Look at the purple robes they wear. Look at the scarlet robes. See the encrusted jewels. Look at the luxurious palaces in which they live. Look at the 11,000 halls and chambers in the Vatican and the unbounded wealth and glory gathered there. Look at the gorgeous spectacles in St. Peter's at Rome, casting even the magnificence of royalty into the shade. Go and see these things and read the testimony of those who have seen them. Shamelessly, Rome wears the very raiment, the very hues and colors portrayed in the pages of inspired prophecy. You may know the harlot by her attire, as certainly as by the name upon her brow. Now I'll comment. I've told people, after finally coming to the realization by reading Revelation chapter 17 and its color, vivid description of the Roman Catholic Church, I've often said, if one were to simply blindly take what is written in Revelation chapter 17 and commit brush to oil and canvas, exactly what is written there, when one pulled off his mask and looked at what he painted, he would find the Roman Catholic Church on canvas. It can't be mistaken. It's a perfect physical description of the Roman Catholic Church. And to say otherwise is to expose oneself to doubt of his credibility. That's what this author is telling you. Now he continues, he says, but to come to the darkest feature, has not the Church of Rome drunk most abundantly the precious blood of the saints and martyrs? We appeal to the facts. What of the Albigensians in the 13th century? What of the Waldenses of the 13th century on to the time of Cromwell and the Commonwealth? You have not forgotten Milton's poem about them, those memorable lines? And what of the persecutions of Protestants in France? Those dreadful persecutions mercilessly continued for more than 300 years. What of the massacre of St. Bartholomew and the revocation of the Edict of Nantes? What of the fires of Smithfield? What of the terrible Inquisition? Stay, and I will take you to the Inquisition. You shall enter its gloomy portals. You shall walk through its dark passages. You shall stand in its infernal torture chamber. You shall hear the cries of some of its victims. You shall listen to their very words. What agonies have been suffered in these somber vaults, unseen by any human eyes save those of fiendish inquisitors. What cries have been uttered in this dismal place which have never reached the open world in which we live? Locked doors shut them in. Stone walls stifled them. No sound escaped, not even that of a faint and distant moan. But now and then a victim found release. One and another have come forth from the torture chamber, pale and trembling, maimed and mutilated, to tell the things that they experienced when in the hands of the holy inquisitors. We shall call in some of those as witnesses. This book is Limborch's History of the Inquisition. It tells the story of its origin 700 years ago and of its establishment and progress in France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Poland, Sicily, Sardinia, Germany, Holland, and other parts of the world. It describes its ministers and methods, its vicars, assistants, notaries, judges, and other officials. It describes the power of the inquisitors and their manner of proceeding. It unveils their dread tribunal, opens their blood-stained records, describes their dungeons, the secret tortures they inflicted, the extreme, merciless, unmitigated tortures, and also the public so-called acts of faith, autos de fe, or burning of heretics. What a record. What a world of tyranny and intolerable anguish compressed into that one word, the Inquisition. Tyranny over the conscience. Men in the name of Jesus Christ stretching and straining, maiming and mangling their fellow men to compel them to call light darkness and darkness light. To call the gospel of Jesus Christ a lie and the lie of Satan truth. To confess that wrong is right and acknowledge right as wrong. To bow down to man and worship him as God. To call the teachings of Jesus Christ heresy and the teachings of Antichrist divine. Tremendous was the power of that dread tribunal. In Spain and Portugal, it completely crushed out the Protestant Reformation. No secrets could be withheld from the inquisitors. Hundreds of persons were often apprehended in one day, and in consequence of information resulted from their examinations under torture, thousands more were apprehended. Prisons, convents, even private houses were crowded with victims. The cells of the Inquisition were filled and emptied again and again. Its torture chamber was a hell. The most excruciating engines, apparatuses specifically designed for the torture of God's people, were employed to dislocate the limbs of even tender women. Thousands were burned at the stake. The gospel was gagged and crushed. And Christ himself, in the person of his members, subjected to the anguish of a second Golgotha. Let us look into the chamber of horrors in the Spanish Inquisition. The place of torture, says the Spanish historian, quoted by Limborch on page 217, the place of torture in the Spanish Inquisition is generally an underground and very dark room, to which one enters through several doors. There is a tribunal erected in it, in which the inquisitor, the inspector, and the secretary sit. When the candles are lighted and the person to be tortured brought in, the executioner who is waiting for him makes an astonishing and dreadful appearance. He is covered all over with a black linen garment down to his feet and tied close to his body. His head and face are all concealed with a long black cowl, only 2 little holes left in it for him to see through. All this is intended to strike the miserable wretch with greater terror in mind and body when he sees himself going to be tortured by the hands of one who thus looks like the very devil himself. The degrees of torture are described by Julius Clarus and other writers, quoted by Limborch. They were various and included the following. Number 1, the being threatened to be tortured. Number 2, being carried to the place of torture. Number 3, the stripping and binding. That's right, they stripped naked all of their subjects and bound them. Number 4, the being hoisted up on the rack, and we'll discuss that further. And number 5, what they called squazation. This was the torture of the pulley. Besides this, there was the torture of the fire, or chafing dish, full of burning charcoal applied to the soles of the feet. Then there was the torture of the rack, and of another instrument called by the Spaniards escalero. Then that of the pouring of water into a bag of linen stuffed down the throat. They call it waterboarding today, I will add. And that of the iron dice, forced into the feet by screws, and of canes placed across and between the fingers, and so compressed as to produce intolerable pain. Then the torture of cords drawn tightly around various parts of the body, cutting through the flesh, and of the machine in which the sufferer was fixed heads down, and lastly, the torture of red-hot irons applied to the breasts and the sides till they burned to the bone. Here on page 219 is the account of the stripping of victims, men and women, preparatory to torture. The stripping from them of every vestige of clothing by these holy inquisitors, and how they put them on short linen drawers, leaving all the rest of the body naked for the free action of the tormentors. Here on page 221 is the account by Isaac Arobio of what he suffered when in their hands. It was toward the evening, he said, when he was brought to the place of torture in the Inquisition. It was a large underground room, arched, and the walls covered with black hangings. The candlesticks were fastened to the walls, and the whole room enlightened with candles placed in them. At one end of it, there was an enclosed place called like a closet, where the inquisitor and notary sat at a table, so that the place seemed to him as the very mansion of death, everything appearing so terrible and awful. Then the inquisitor admonishes him to confess the truth about before his torments began. When he answered that he had told the truth, the inquisitor gravely protested that since he was so obstinate as to suffer the torture, the Holy Office would be innocent. What exquisite hypocrisy that the Holy Office of the Inquisition would be innocent if he should even expire in his torments. When he had said this, they put the linen garment over his body and drew it so very close on each side as to squeeze him to death. When he was almost dying, they slackened all at once the sides of the garment, and after he began to breathe again, the sudden alteration put him into the most grievous anguish and pain. When he had overcome this torture, the same admonition was repeated, that he would confess the truth in order to prevent further torment. As he persisted in his denial, they tied his limbs so very tight with small cords as made the extremities of them swell greatly and caused the blood to spurt out from under his nails. After this, he was placed with his back against the wall and fixed upon a bench. Into the wall were fastened iron pulleys through which there were ropes drawn and tied around his arms and legs in several places. The executioner, drawing these ropes with great violence, fastened his body with them to the wall, his arms and legs, especially his fingers and toes, being bound so tightly as to put him to the most exquisite pain, so that it seemed to him just as though he was dissolving in flames. After this, a new kind of torture succeeded. There was an instrument like a small ladder, made of 2 upright pieces of wood, and 5 crossed ones sharpened in the front. This the torturer placed over against him, and by the single motion struck it with great violence against both his shins, so that he received upon each of them at once 5 violent strokes, which put him to such intolerable anguish that he fainted away. After this he came to himself, and they inflicted on him a further torture. The torturer tied ropes around Arobio's wrists, and then put these ropes around his back, which was covered in leather to prevent him from getting hurt. Then, falling backwards, he drew the ropes with all his might till they cut through Arrobio's flesh, even to the very bones. And this torture was repeated twice, the ropes being tied around his arms at a distance of 2 fingers' breadth from the former wound, and drawn with the same violence. On this, the physician and surgeon were sent for out of the neighboring apartment to ask whether the torture could be continued without danger of death. As there was a prospect of his living through it, the torture was then repeated, after which he was bound up in his own clothes and carried back to prison. Here, opposite to this recital, is a picture representing these various tortures. After prolonged imprisonment, Arrobio was released and banished from the kingdom of Seville. Before we let fall the curtain upon this awful subject, let's listen for a moment to some of the words of William Lithgow, a Scotchman who suffered the tortures of the Inquisition in the times of James I. After telling of the diabolical treatment he received, which was very similar to that I described above, he says, quote, "Now mine eyes did begin to startle, my mouth to foam and froth, and my teeth to chatter like the doubling of drumsticks. Oh, strange, inhuman, monster man-mangler! And notwithstanding my shivering lips in this fiery passion, my vehement groaning, and blood springing from my arms, my broken sinews, yea, and my depending weight on flesh-cutting cords, yet they struck me on the face with cudgels to abate and cease the thundering noise of my wrestling voice. There were no mercy for those denounced as heretics by the Roman Catholic Church, but they were no heretics. They were the redeemed of Christ our Savior.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188. Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.